So for assignment number 3, or I guess for worksheet number 3, the main thing that I want you all to focus on is I want you to learn to distinguish between the way passive voice endings work in Latin versus active voice endings. So unlike the imperative mood, if you remember, where you basically take this word, audire, or audit if you like, but let's focus on audire, because that's just the one that we're doing for today. So this is what's called the infinitive form, or the infinitive mood, if you want to call it that. But basically, this is more or less your basic form of the verb. It's the verb if you just sort of were to consider the verb by itself, not being I hear or he hears or she hears, but just the concept of hearing, just to hear, basically. Now, this is more or less the basic form of the verb. And in order to make it into the imperative mood, if you remember, all you need to do is you need to take off the RE. You just take the sort of stem of the verb, audi, and then if you want to turn it into a plural, you would say audite. And that's how you make it into the imperative mood. Again, though, the passive voice has nothing, the voices are completely separate from the moods. So, instead, what I want you to do is I want you to get used to recognizing the difference between the active voice endings, because the endings are just, they have their own category of endings, versus the passive voice endings. And so basically here's how it works. If it's active voice, then the verb will end in a T in the singular or an NT in the plural. In other words, T or NT. And passive voice will end in a ter or an n-ter, an n-ter. So the way to say he hears in Latin is audit. The way you say they hear in Latin is audiunt. You can see the T versus the NT ending. The way to say he is heard in Latin is auditor. The way you say they are heard is audiuntur. Ter versus enter. And so for your homework, the only thing you need to really focus on is figuring out which of the words in the sentence is the verb. How do you tell which one is the verb when you don't know what the words mean? Well, it's actually rather simple. Do they end in one of these endings? If so, then that means that they are the verb of the sentence. But if they don't end in one of these endings, then they're a different type of word. So you have audit versus audiunt, and then all you need to do, in fact, if you want, you can write these down. These 4 endings right here. You can write these 4 endings down. Audit, audiunt, auditor, audiuntor. If they end in one of these 2 endings, they're in the active voice, and so you should write that down underneath your sentence. And if they have one of these endings, they are the passive voice. Now, if you have one with both an active voice word and a passive voice word, then it's the same thing that you did in assignment 1, where you had to basically write that you had to say both active and passive, but you had to say which one is which. Now, you might notice that this is actually slightly more convenient than it is in English, because in English, sometimes you kind of have to guess whether or not a sentence is active or passive. It's hard to tell sometimes, and it relies on a lot of shifting around of words and just all this different stuff that you have to do. Whereas in Latin, it's very simple to tell whether or not a given whether or not a given sentence is active or passive. It's active if and only if it has one of the active endings, and it's passive if and only if it has the ter enter endings, one of the passive endings. And I believe that should be everything for for today for your worksheets. So be sure to get that done, and I will see you guys once again next week.